Good afternoon, everybody. This is Susan Gillis, Curator of the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. Welcome to our virtual lecture series, Boca History 101. We have muted your mics today. Please don't unmute and don't join with video because we are recording this session, and we will provide you with a link to the recording or any of the lectures if you happen to miss any of them. So today we're going to get in our Wayback Machine and visit Boca Raton's Pioneer Days, Part 1. So I always like to start my lectures with a little bit about how Boca got her name. And briefly, the Boca de Ratones was a navigational term referring to a rocky or jagged inlet, but the original Boca de Ratones was on Biscayne Bay, near Miami Beach in Miami today. And somehow in the 19th century, the name got put on our Lake Boca Raton, and the more southerly place name went away, the more northerly stayed. Our name is just a map maker's error. So our early pioneers were kind of conflicted about how we spelled Boca Raton, which is kind of fun. As you can see in the upper left, our plat map from 1896, this is a 1900 version, spells Boca Raton the way we do today. But a lot of our pioneers like to spell it R-A-T-O-N-E, so you would pronounce it with a long O. And the post office, at least for a while, thought it should be one word with an E. Very trendy in the 19-teens, I think. So let's set the stage a little bit, literally. First of all, we know that the East Coast Canal, today the Intercoastal, was dredged through our area probably in the late 1880s. And it was dredged through existing waterways, including Lake Boca Raton, Lake Rogers, Lake Wyman, and the Spanish River. So it was a navigable transport canal early in the 1890s. Also in 1892, the Dade County Commission, and Dade was a huge county back then, all the way from Stewart to the Keys, not a lot of people. They have the construction of the county road, which took the approximate route of the Florida East Coast Railway and Dixie Highway. And there was a stage line on that route from Lantana to North Miami. And we know there was a stage stop, in the vicinity of what is now the Dixie Highway flyover bridge into Deerfield, somewhere in that vicinity. But the stage didn't last very long because in 1895, 1896, Henry Flagler decides to extend his Florida East Coast Railway south from West Palm to Miami. And this is a very important event in the history of our community and, of course, the whole state, because it opened up Southeast Florida for development. So this gentleman, Tom Rickards, originally from Ohio and Missouri, he moved to North Florida in the 1880s to escape the cold. And by the early 1890s, he's actually purchasing land in the vicinity of what is now Boca Raton. He was also a surveyor. So he was commissioned by the railway to plat a town, establish a town of Boca Raton on Mr. Flagler's railway. And you see a copy, this is a 1900 version of his 1896 plat, which the reason I have the 1900 version is the 1896 map is so faded you can't read it. So he's really our founding citizen. So Mr. Rickards brings his wife Lizzie and 4 kids to the area and builds this house on what is today the Intercoastal Waterway south of the Palmetto Park Road Bridge on the east bank of the canal, and in about 1897. And so it would be today that would be the Port Lamar neighborhood. So the house faced west. There was a commissary, a store to deal with the local citizens and also the Indians passing by. And of course a dock and you can see the mail boat stopping there. Mr. Rickards became the agent for the Florida East Coast Railway. He also owned a lot of property here. He called his property the Black Hat Plantation in eastern Boca Raton. And he was a grower growing citrus and pineapples and so on. In 1904, there was a very bad storm, destroyed a lot of his crops. So he and Lizzie moved to North Carolina in 1906. However, his kids kind of stayed in the area, not in Boca Raton, but in West Palm and Miami. So let's set the scene. Early Boca Raton had a lot of jungle hammocks. And when I say jungle, I mean jungle, as you can see here. It was also a lot of scrub land, and scrub is a natural habitat. It's not meant to be a derogatory term, with a lot of pine trees and saw palmettos. You can see those in the distance in this photograph. And can you notice the train is chugging through the property? Now, so this photo is from 1925. I wanted to jump ahead a little bit just because it absolutely fascinates me. Dixie Highway is there in the foreground. The building is what is now the Addison event venue at Camino Real, Dixie, was Mr. Miser's headquarters. And we know it was built in 25, and you can see it's actually under construction. So what that means is that pine forest there is the parking lot of the Addison and the Fancy Publix at Camino Real and Dixie. And this is as recent as 1925. If you look very closely, you can see oxen in the picture, and they are actually building Camino Real. And just in case you wondered, that white stuff is not snow, it's sugar sand. The beaches were wide open. There was no condos to block the breeze or the view. The fishing was apparently spectacular. And here's a photo of a gentleman with a flounder caught in Lake Boca Raton. That's one of our favorite images. So this is a map from the 19-teens, actually, and you can see that most of our residences are along what's going to be Palmetto Park Road. The faint diagonal line at left is the railway, and that really was the center of town because that's where the freight depot was. You can see a blue arrow points to the future approximate location of Town Hall. So we are blessed to have a lot of information on our pioneer era, and I wanted to talk about that just a minute. For one thing, we have the survey ledgers and a lot of the correspondence from the Rickards, Mr. Rickards, courtesy his descendants. And we also have correspondence and the diaries of this gentleman, Frank Cheeseburg. Frank was actually a New Yorker by birth, but really lived in Michigan, was a Michigander, moves to Boca Raton in 1903 because of the cold. He becomes our largest farmer in the area, very successful businessman. He was really a horticulturalist, very civic-minded, very active in the community. He acts as kind of a chamber of commerce for the community for many years. And so he keeps this diary, as farmers do, from the day he arrived until the day he died in 36. His sister made the last sad little entry. And these diaries take the form of little tiny books, a few inches by a few inches. And they're written in script, in pencil, never sharpened his pencil. And they tend to be in jargon because they're for him. However, my wonderful volunteers and interns spent, well, over a decade transcribing these diaries to the best of our ability. Sometimes we just plain don't know what he's saying. We can't understand a letter or a word or a reference. However, it's a wonderful resource on the pioneer era. It's like time travel. And so we have, if you follow us on Twitter at Boca History, you can follow Mr. Cheeseburg's diary entries from 100 years ago today, and we have been doing that since I think 2011. So in Frank's world, it's 1920, which is a very exciting time in Boca Raton history. So be sure and follow him. So this is Frank's property. It was really what is today Southeast Boca Raton, including where the resort, the Boca Raton Resort and Club is today. His house was east of Dixie and south of Camino Real. And it was on his land in kind of in what is today Royal Palm Yacht and Country Club, just south of the roundabout where you go into the hotel, that the first cemetery was located, just a very small cemetery. That cemetery has been moved twice. It's in its third location today. Along with Frank, Nettie, his wife, joins him. She works right alongside him. She was disabled in an accident, was paralyzed, so she was an invalid for many years. Harry was 21 when he came, and he was, of course, a great help to his father. Harry kept a diary too, and later he would become a landscape guy, own a nursery, which I think is a very Florida profession. Esther and Ruth were teenagers at the time. Esther took a stint at school teaching. She did not like it. And she marries a man named Joe Bell, who's a widower with some children from West Palm. Ruth went away to school, and she never married, but she is buried with her folks at our cemetery. So many of our early settlers in South Florida in the late 19th, early 20th century are actually North Floridians, both white and African American. Most of them, I would say. But there were also Michiganders, Vermonters, New Yorkers, and even Scots. So let's meet a few of them. Perry and Florence Purdom came from Volusia County, that's near Daytona, in about 1905, 1906. Mrs. Purdom had 11 kids, 8 of whom survived, and they were farmers. George and Katie Long were friends of the Rickards. They're from Interlaken in North Florida and came in 1902. Mr. Long was a Harvard-educated engineer and a surveyor. And they lived in several homes, including the original Rickards House, but this is the one most associated with them. And it stood south of Palmetto Park Road in what today would be the middle of Dixie Highway. It had its own electric generating plant, a substantial library, phonograph, so it was kind of the party house in town. Long acted as an agent for Mr. Rickards when he passed away, as agent for the railroad, commissary manager, postmaster, and eventually he was our first city mayor. He also had the first packing house. Now, interestingly, can you see those poles sticking out of the little grove in front of his house? That's an above ground irrigation system, which supposedly was the first in the state. I'm not sure how you prove that, but I thought that was very interesting. Bert and Annie Rollerson come from Flagler County in 1904. Annie is Perry Purdom's sister, so they really came first. And they built this charming two-storied house west Palmetto Park Road, so west of the FEC tracks. Very early on, I'm not sure of the exact date, because back then you didn't need a permit. You didn't need a permit till 1925, so there's no sort of paper trail. We just have people's memories. And you can see there's a sleeping porch on the second floor at the back of the house with some screening to keep the raccoons and possums from climbing in. And please notice the yard, the landscaping in the yard. That's natural Boca Raton. So this house was rescued in the 70s and moved and restored. It's off Southwest 2nd Avenue, south of Palmetto Park Road. And it's today is our oldest known existing house. Charlie Rollerson was Bert's first cousin. He came with his folks and sister from Fort Pierce in 1911, and he will marry Eula Raton in 1913, and they lived here most of their lives. Harley Gates comes from Vermont in 1913. He's joined with his new bride the next year, and he builds this concrete block bungalow where the wildflower property is today. And they call it Palmetto Park Plantation. Now, I like to mention that plantation in the early 20th century just means farm. It has no connotation with slavery or the antebellum era. It's just a name for farm, still commonly used. So Palmetto Park Plantation, of course, it gives its name to Palmetto Park Road. The Gates had 2 kids, including Imogene Alice, who was born in 1916, and she was the proverbial tropical Boca child. She had a pet raccoon named Petey. Now, Imogene, later known as Diane Benedetto, lived to be 99. So again, we're very blessed to have her narrative histories of what it was like, her idyllic childhood, as well as these charming drawings. And you can see poor Mrs. Gates doing laundry the old-fashioned way with the tub and the scrub board. Imogene and Petey really resisted having their weekly bath. Mrs. Gates would make use of flour sacks and so on, recycle that as underwear. And you could always add to your larder with a fishing trip. And on one such occasion, Imogene and Mr. Gates go out and they bring Petey along, and Petey got seasick. And he did not forgive them for quite some time. So on the south of Palmetto Park Road, in what is today Silver Palm Park, that's the boat launch, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Charles Gordon lived, and they came in 1912. They were snowbirds. Very early on, snowbirds. And they built this charming bungalow. They eventually moved to Delray, and the house was taken over by Virginia and Pearl Kenny, who were Vermonters, presumably knew Mr. Gates and the Gates family. And the inset shows Harley, Mrs. Virginia Kenny, Mrs. Gordon, whose name I have been unable to determine, Mr. Gordon, and Pearlie Kenny. And I use this picture of the house because you can see the Palmetto Park Road Bridge is not built yet. As a matter of fact, I think perhaps it's about to be constructed in this photograph. Now, Harley Gates was not so successful at farming. His heart belonged to real estate. That's what he did in Vermont. That's what he was successful at down here. He built a series of cabins, tourist cottages, on East Federal Highway, east of Federal Highway on East Palmetto Park Road in about 1950. And they all were apparently named for a state, possibly for whoever the first occupants were. So we have Indiana and Texas Cottage. Now, I wanted to share these with you because look at the yard, look at the background, think where you are. You're east of US 1 on Palmetto Park Road, and there's not a palm tree in sight. I see a lot of saw palmetto, I see a lot of pine trees, I see a lot of sand. Real Boca Raton. So Nellie and George Race were originally snowbirds from New York. They come in 1914, and I think New York Cottage was like the nicest one. And so they are going to purchase Singing Pines from the Myricks in 1917. So let's meet the Myricks. The Myricks came from Charlotte in 1910, and eventually they built this charming little house we call Singing Pines. Originally, it was on what is today Southwest First Avenue, so the west side of the FEC track south of Palmetto Park Road, actually south of where Boca L is today. In the late 70s, the Historical Society actually rescued this house, relocated it to a site north of City Hall complex on the 4th diagonal on Crawford Boulevard. And there it sits today, and of course it is home of the Boca Raton Children's Museum. And it's probably the second oldest house in town. So a lot we know about our African American community really comes from Cheeseburg's diaries and the 1910 Deerfield census. Poor old Boca Raton didn't warrant its own census till 1920. So most of Cheeseburg's employees, we believe, were from Deerfield, but I infer from some of the diaries that some of them may have lived in what is today the city limits of Boca Raton, possibly on what the longtime residents called the Hill, Northwest 4th Avenue and Palmetto Park Road, in that vicinity. There are several pictures in the Cheeseburg collection, and unfortunately, nobody is identified. So this beautiful picture of this family look like they're dressed for Sunday church or some special occasion. Unfortunately, we don't know who they are. So our first known African-American resident is C.W. Blaine. And he was here in 1900. That's quite early days for Boca Raton. He was a sharecropper. He planted tomatoes and beans. And after this, he just disappears off our radar. We don't know what happened to him. But as early as 1904, Mr. Cheeseburg mentions AJ or Anderson and also Huntley as longtime workers for Mr. Cheeseburg. Lena is a sharecropper. We don't know her last name, but eventually she would become a nurse to Mrs. Cheeseburg. So she really became a member of the family. This wonderful picture has nobody identified. And here are some of the names from those early diaries. Bradford, Edgecombe, Reed. Sometimes he calls people by their last name, sometimes their first name, sometimes just an initial. So you kind of have to interpret. I would love to know more about Mrs. Shaywood. But Alex Hughes and Will Demery are going to become actual Boca Raton residents. In 1915, now Rickards still owned a lot of property here, so he has his agent, Mr. Long, plat a new subdivision called Pearl City for the African American community. Remember, it was still the days of segregation. Now, Pearl City is a neighborhood today. It's south of Glades between Dixie and Federal Highway. And this Pearl City was set up so the African American population could buy land here and live here, and it wasn't such a long walk to the area farms. I believe that Pearl City was named for the Hawaiian Pearl variety of pineapple, which seems to have been grown here. And check out those pineapples, right? Not like the ones you get at Publix. I know there was a pineapple packing shed on the site of Pearl City before it was founded. So that's established in 1915. Today it is a historic district, one of our 2 historic districts. And it's really our oldest existing neighborhood. So let's meet a couple of our Pearl City pioneers. Alex and Florence Hughes came from Monticello. Is that right, Mary? Monticello, Florida in 1915. They purchased land in 1915. They came to 1912 to Deerfield. In 1915, they came to Boca Raton. Florence passes in, I believe, 17. And Alex would marry Annie Spain Hughes and adopt her family. There are a lot of Spains still in the area. Alex was what we would call a community activist. He was instrumental in founding the two of the pioneer churches, as well as getting the school, first school for African American children. He lived until his 90s and worked almost until his death. And Hughes Park on Glades Road is named for him. Will and Belle Demery come from North Carolina and Georgia. Again, they're first in Deerfield and then moved to Boca, to Pearl City. I know Belle had 12 children, and Sarah here was the first child born in Pearl City. Alvin and Gladys Fountain came from Georgia in 1915, and the Fountain House on Pearl Street was built in 29 and is the oldest existing house in Pearl City. So now let's meet Our Yamato Colony, the Japanese and Japanese American folks, this map is from 1909, and this was when Palm Beach County was new, was carved out of the northern portion of Dade County. In 1915, Broward was created out of the middle of Palm Beach and Dade County. So you can see on this map, we have Boca Raton, one word, no E, and Yamato. Now that is how you say it, Yamato or Yamato. I have a recording of Frank Kamiya very insistently pronouncing it. And the colony was founded in 1904, 1905 by the gentleman in the dark suit in this photo, Joe Sakai. And Joe was American educated, and he had these followers, initially just bachelors. And these gentlemen were interested in opportunity in the United States. Most of them were from middle-class families, and not necessarily farmers by profession. But at the time, Japan still practiced primogeniture. So the eldest would inherit, you know, kind of like in Downton Abbey. So they really needed economic opportunity. And also a lot of the Yamato settlers were actually Protestants. And at the time, it was very politically incorrect to be a Christian in Japan. The settlement, you can see that photo is from 1908 at bottom, consisted of Japanese, white, and black settlers, possibly Bahamians, never more than 35 people, maybe as much as 50. So just a separate little community. Upper right's my favorite picture. Pretty soon, ladies joined, and of course, eventually you're going to have Japanese American settlers at Yamato. A lot of these women, when they came to the US, they gave up kimono and a lot of the traditions that come with that. And in our ethnocentric point of view, this was liberating. That is very ethnocentric of us for them. However, again, they came from middle-class families, and back home, they probably had indoor plumbing and electricity. And now they are on permanent camping trips in the scrub of Boca Raton with all the pests and the heat and everything, bless them. You can see Yamato had its own train station and its own post office. So it really was a separate little town. Let's meet some of the Yamato settlers. This is actually originally was the Sakai house. Henry Kamiya was Joe's brother, and it becomes the Kamiya house. And it too was a nice system, the settlement. It had its own electric generating plant, just like Mr. Long, which was pretty hot stuff back in those days. Power lines didn't come to Boca until 25, 26, when FPL was new. And here's the Kamiya family. Here's Joe and Seda Sakai and their family. There were two Kobayashi families, not related. Thanks for confusing me. Hideo and Yumeko, and Susumi and Suyi. Here's George and Jean Yoshida, and two bachelors, George Murakami and Shibo Kamikama. And we will meet them again in the World War II talk. So why did they all come? Well, to farm, of course. And this wonderful picture taken very early on, clearing land to grow pineapples, or pines as they call them. And in those early days, there's no roads, there's no way to get heavy equipment to the farmland. So as J.B. Wiles, who was a Deerfield pioneer, recollected, if you were plowing and there was a tree that was down or a stump, you just plowed around. You had to make do with that. So this concludes part one of our pioneer days, and we will take up the story of farming and everyday life for our pioneers in our next lecture. Thank you for joining us today.